Well, hey everybody, it's HeapCVA. Welcome to my channel. We are doing another tutorial. This will be tutorial number 5, I think, in the 911 First Responders / Emergency 4 game settings that are available for us to make changes to change the way the game plays, to take advantage of mods that are available if you want to add those to the base game and play the mods, and to just make changes to make the game play the way that you want to play it. So the last tutorial ended our discussions with the config file, config file, that's in 911 First Responders. If you just look at the base, the config file is right here. And there it will sit. It won't move. I showed you some changes to make. Some you can make, some you don't have to make. Any change made here applies to everything in the base game. Anything that you put, if you add a mod, it applies to the mod as well, because this gets loaded before the mod gets loaded. So put that in the back of your mind somewhere. You don't have to fuss with it right this minute. But that was, to me, one level of changes that we can make that are pretty straightforward. I will never call anything easy, but that affect the base game for those of you that don't have mods, that gives you some change and gives you some elasticity to the game to do some things a little different, or So let's take playing the game, the base game, to the next level. And how are we going to do that? Well, we talked some tutorials ago about the 2 subfolders that are in the master folder for 911 First Responders or Emergency 4. There was data and there were mods. Now, your mod folder may be empty, or it may be like mine, it's got like 18 of them in it. So our next step after the config file, the em4.cfg file, is to go into the data folder. So if we open that, remember I told you there's a ton of folders under here. Well, ton is a stretch of the imagination, but there's a lot of folders under here. And quite honestly, there's a lot of files in these folders. So the next thing that we're going to learn how to do, and it's going to take more than one tutorial, I can tell you that right now, is we're going to, and I'm only talking about the base game right now. I'm not talking about what changes you can make to mods, although what I'm going to show you applies to how you would do that as well. Does that make sense? Where the config file, you make a change in that, it applies to anything you run in your folder. The folders we're going to look at today only would affect the base game or the missions. But if you know how to do it in the base game, you know how to make those changes in any mod that you add as well. Okay? So we're in the data folder, and under that we have all of these things here. There's some really interesting ones. Maps, models, and one that doesn't seem like it would be very interesting but is hugely important, and that is a folder called specs. Just like the kind of the side name for glasses. I've got specs on right now so I can see to do this tutorial. And that's where we're going to land next. So let's double click the specs folder and open it up and see what's in this bad boy. And you're like, what are those? These are XML files. Notice that the names of the file have a .xml extension. This is code. Congratulations. You're going to learn how to be a sort of a computer programmer, because you're going to make changes in these XML files that change the way the game acts. It makes you a programmer of sorts. You may not have originated the code, but you're going to modify it. So there's a lot of XML files in here, and this isn't the only file that these exist in, but this is the first one that we're going to deal with, because in the base game there's some changes that can be made in this arena that go directly to how the game plays for you personally. So there's ones on audio commands, there's campaign ones, there's a lot of these FP underscore params, which is short for parameters, files. There's some free base files, some materials files, portraits, terrain, vehicles. All of those files require their own tutorial, because if we sat down to talk about all of those right now, we'd be here for about 2.5 hours, and I wouldn't be able to cover everything in 2.5 hours. So the ones that we're really going to talk about, and you need to put in the front of your head, you've already got the config file up there and you know that. The next folder you need to always remember is under the data folder is the specs subfolder, and in there is these files. We want to look at two really important files, depending on what type of game you're going to play that day in your 911 or Emergency 4 base game. Are you going to play an endless free play game on the map and just go on incident after incident after incident? Are you going to do the challenge, which I think came in the deluxe version? If you guys know what I'm talking about, there's a base version of the game that was sold, and then they sold a deluxe version that had an extra map. They do have what is now considered a very old version of a multiplayer, which we won't even go into that today, but someday we'll touch that. Or are you going to do the missions, which I believe is under the challenge subheading. So there's two that you really need to know and be familiar with. They need to be, just like the config file, they need to be your best friends. You may never do any changes, but if you know where these are, if somebody asks you something, you're going to know this answer off the top of your head, and people are going to think you're the smartest person in the room. So, most of us, if you have a mod, or you just like playing the game and going on fires and medical calls and chasing down bad guys, you like the free play version, or the endless game, as the game refers to it. Well, the FP underscore params underscore endless file is one you should know exactly where that file is. Don't move it out of this folder. Leave it here. You can change it. Don't take it out of there. Up about 5 is a parameter file called challenge. Now, right now I'm talking about just one person playing their game by themselves. The challenge and the endless function the same, but one is just on the base map with an open free play game, and the other folds those changes that you might make into the challenges or the missions. So I'm going to show them to you, but it's going to take another tutorial, at least one, to go into each of these once you see how much stuff is in them. So I may even have this one open already. We open up the FP underscore params underscore endless .xml. That's an awful lot, isn't it? You notice it says free play parameters at the top. Remember that. If I quickly show you how far it goes down to the bottom, it's a pretty good size file. And you notice there's those arrows again with the /. What were those things? Those are containers. So when you're doing computer programming in certain programming languages, you use containers for values or statements or how certain things run or whether a light turns on or off. You know what I mean? And very much the same in here. So all of these things are value statements again. You've heard that term before. And each one does something to the game before it starts. Up here, this is one tutorial on whatever there is. And I think there's 12 different values and the value statements that affect how the game starts. And then we go past some, like from ratings down to here. See how it's in gray? I've never touched them. Honestly, I don't believe you need to fool with them. Half of it's in German anyway. Now, and I'm not saying that that's a bad thing. It's just for me, I don't understand it. So then when you scroll down, there's a couple that are off by itself and miscellaneous, one of which you can worry about or not. The other one has to do with how you control a train. And we all see the train in both the base game and the mods. And then you get to a container that has events. Now, you may think you're going to a fire when you play the game, or a traffic accident, or a pickpocket. Sorry, I screwed that one up. Or a purse snatching. But the game refers to them as events. Remember that. You can't change that word, and you can't make changes to that particular title. A fire event is its own category. And if you look at the next one under it, and they're initialed by the guy that originally created the coding, the EFPE is event. There's some German in here. And then the name of this event is event fall. So when somebody falls and you send an ambulance, and like if you're in a European mod, you send the doctor in the smaller vehicle. That's what that is. It has a value. It's either enabled or it's not enabled. We'll get back to that. You can see it has a certain frequency that you'll hear about it. In a given length of time that you play the game, how often will you go on a medical emergency where somebody has fallen? And the supervisor start, if you use the, I call him a dispatcher, but in the game he's considered a supervisor for the tutorial. You actually see him again when you're regularly playing. This tells you which event he's dispatching you to, because the supervisor has to know to tell you to go to that fall. And then the finish value usually is blank. I don't think I've ever seen anything in any of them. And notice that it's got a closing thing here. So this container has this entire event and all the things in it. And each event has its own container full of information. So this is really something that we're going to get into in a little more depth. So it's not for this tutorial per se, but just know that, you may have found, I won't call it the gold mine, but it is definitely something you're going to want to be familiar with if you're trying to change things a little bit to make the game last longer, to change things, you want to be only police this time, or only fire this time, or only EMS. If you've heard those terms before, if you've heard me say them, if you've heard people say them, you've seen it on forums, now you know what everybody's talking about. There's a whole bunch of these. And they go from something simple like a fall all the way down to what I consider the big event in this game, which is the earthquake, which I've let happen a few times, but I prefer to have a lot of different incidents instead of one bad thing that eats up all the time I have. So most of the time, I don't let the earthquake occur. But you can. So that's events. Remember that term. That's how this game sees the things that you get dispatched on. Then there's cleanup, mostly for hazardous materials incidents. And the last one you can really fool with if you feel the need is weather. And they call it climate, but it's in basic terms, it's do you want rain? Do you not want rain? Do you want a lot of sun? Do you want some clouds? Do you want a little fog? All of that stuff is in this part of this particular file. And it actually is the ending of this particular free play parameters file. You can change everything in here if you want. You can even change the color of the fog. I haven't changed it to anything. I ought to change it to like purple or something just to see what happens. Make a note of that. Anyway, let's zip back up to the top. So that's the endless parameters. Let's look at the parameters for challenge or mission. Yes, I really did change. It's identical. The only thing that's different is the file that it's in. It's not in a folder, it's a file. This is an XML file. They just renamed it so that it could use these same values in the other tab. You know, you get the free play tab and then the other one, which is either challenge or depending on your version of the game, so that they could move the values to each section. Same file. Why is that important? You need to know where this is because if you get into mods or you want to only play the missions, let's say, where police are involved, but you don't want to go on fires. Just like we talked about in the Endless game, you could turn off all of the events that would be fire related in this side, in the base game. And I'll tell you that if you change these files and you're in the base file directory, it only applies to the base game. If you start up a mod and you've made changes in this parameters file under the base game files, it won't affect the mods at all. That's for another day, but just, you know, we're only talking about playing the base game right this minute. So, that tells you where we're headed next. It does eat up a lot of time. We're probably at 20 minutes already. We haven't changed a thing. But now you know where it's at. Remember, in your directory folder, however you get to the game name folder, I'm 911 First Responders. You could have Emergency 4 or EM4. And you go down, the very next folder is Data. You want to open the Data folder, look for the Specs, S-P-E-C-S, Specs folder. Open that, and your parameter files will be in there. So, that being said, that's enough for this tutorial. You kind of know where this is, and you kind of get an idea where we're headed from here. And then in the next two videos, we're going to hammer hard the parameters to make some significant changes in how the game plays. And once you see this and you know where it is, you'll be fooling with this constantly, because there's so many things you can do with it to change the way the game plays that you'll not be able to keep your hands off of it, quite honestly, at the end of the day. So, thanks again so much for coming by my channel. I really appreciate your guys' support. I appreciate the comments. I appreciate the recommendations or requests for other tutorials. Man, does that help a lot. And at the end of the day, thanks so much for coming by. Thanks for subscribing if you hadn't already, and you did after one of the videos you just saw. Like I said, it just makes my head spin to realize that this is happening to me, because I never would have anticipated it. With that being said, I'll get back to work as hard as I can, making the best stuff I can to put up on my channel. And I will see you in the next video, whether it's a video or a tutorial, I don't know yet, but it will be one or the other. You guys take care.